Andrew, welcome to Camera Conversations, optimised by Pure Sport. Are we ready to go?
Absolutely. Good afternoon.
We were being careful not to rush into all our points before we even hit record.
Well, there's a lot to talk about.
That was definitely the risk. But something you and I were speaking about over message when getting organised for this was almost like a waking up moment, because you were mentioning how I started the podcast. It's very much a self-development podcast. It continues to be so. But in recent months and years, I've had to delve in more to the political space and the state of the UK. So I wonder, from your perspective, what sort of woke you up to what on earth's going on and made you start to speak out about it?
I first started feeling really disgruntled with UK politics during the pandemic because I just thought that the policies were not following science and not following common sense and were bankrupting us. Then I sort of thought, well, I don't need to go into politics because they'll sort it out. It's all logical. And I just see it getting worse and worse. And the more research I do, I feel that I can put forward the solutions that Britain needs.
Yeah, I think I call it the C19 period, was a real wake-up call for a lot of us about how your everyday experience of what's happening, the events that are unfolding, are not in alignment with how the politicians are interpreting them and the laws they're enacting. I've got an episode coming up with Darren Grimes, who's now a Reform councillor in Durham. And a lot of what he was speaking about was so much of what is common sense on the street between normal people that we speak about and what we would vote for at the ballot box, either via a manifesto or via some vague promises, doesn't get delivered. And the detachment between what the person in Britain feels, your average Joe on the street feels and wants, and what our politicians deliver has never been a wider chasm. And I think the frustration is so high now, and episodes like this one that we'll do are so timely because people resonate with them when they feel this connection of why on earth are two blokes in a podcast studio in Glasgow able to articulate what I'm feeling more so than our elite ruling class.
Absolutely, and I've got that from my following online as well. A lot of my following are real working class scaffolders down in Essex, guys working in builders merchants in Leeds, just saying that I articulate things very well. But it's just making sense of it all. And talking to so many people, I found that they all agree that Britain's biggest problem is that countless productive people are constantly being punished to fund unproductive people. And then when you dig into that, there's a lot of commonsensical solutions that we could actually offer and the British public should have offered to them.
It's interesting you use the term productive, and I'm nodding in agreement, and it's not a critique, but some people in the UK bristle at the idea of other people being productive versus non-productive. And I think the type of people that listen to a podcast like my one, which is around agency, self-determination, being responsible for your own outcomes, they relate to that intrinsically. But maybe the mid-lane person has been, I don't want to say propagandized, but they've been indoctrinated to some extent by the media about the haves and the have-nots and the deserving and the undeserving. And the UK is suffering a little bit from a culture of jealousy of those that are succeeding. And that has led into some of the things that are booming online now, which you and I are both so critical of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at a lot of social media likes an us versus them narrative. And so the narrative to say rich people are to blame for all of your problems, they're the ones to blame, they exploit everyone, that's why you're struggling, and then it's up to the government to sort it all out for you. I totally and utterly disagree with that narrative. I think that very much your destiny is in your own hands, and a lot of people feel that way, I think.
I think a lot of people do feel that way, but it's giving them a voice and an understanding of what the solutions might be to enable that. Because at the moment, as I said, and people have listened to the episode with Darren by the time this comes out, if your political parties are not enacting policies that enable people to be productive, to excel, to keep more of their wealth, to feel like they're more able to spend on the things that they want to spend on because they've worked hard for the money that they've gained, then there's that almost helplessness. And I went for a coffee with a friend the other day, and he's not somebody that would ever want to come on the podcast. We'd probably get cancelled within about 5 minutes. But he was saying that he did what he was told. He went to university. He got his 2-1. He went on the grad scheme. He now works at a big bank. We won't tell him which bank in case we dox him. And he, for the first time, broke the 50k mark, and he's got his own property he's had for 3 years. And he was thinking about, how on earth am I doing all these things that I was told to do? And at late 20s, early 30s, am I not in the position that I thought I would be in? And I think that's a feeling that many people can relate to. If you've followed the traditional path, which we were pushed to, post-Blair, 50% of people to go to university, all to get a degree, and to saddle yourself with debt to do so, to follow that path and not get the outcomes that you want I think that drives some of the frustration, and what we're now seeing is anger in the UK among these people too.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just described, you could put that into the private and the public sector. So, for example, in the public sector, you have medical students who should actually be recognised as part of the national infrastructure. They study for 6 years, build up £100,000 worth of debt, then get £29,000 starting salary. They then start protesting. If we spent money wisely, we could say, right, every year that you work for the NHS after graduation, we're going to pay off 15% of your student loan. And I can fund that money immediately. I can find that immediately, right, with some cost cuttings I'm going to talk about. Then, there'd be that incentive. Look, we appreciate you're part of the national infrastructure. We're going to do this for you. Then one thing that I really want to mention today is people also feel that in the private sector. I speak to people in their early 50s who say, I've been in the same industry for 30 years. I'm finally doing well. I'm earning over £100,000. I'm going to get a bonus, but I'm being taxed at an effective marginal tax rate of 62%. I've still got £100,000 to pay off on my mortgage. I live in a reasonable house. It's not that flash. And what I think the public don't realise is the Chancellor says, right, we're not going to increase income tax. Income tax has been increased continuously for many years because they've frozen the thresholds, right? You have fiscal drag. That £100,000 level at which you start losing your personal allowance has been frozen since 2010. If it had been index linked and gone up with inflation every year, it would now be at 154,800. So you're taxing more and more people at 62%. I get contacted with people who are doing the same job that in the UK, but have relocated to Cyprus, the Isle of Man, and we're losing that tax revenue. So one of my key points is the cost of increasing taxes means that you lose your entire tax revenue. And it's because of people like this are so frustrated, but a lot of people don't have any sympathy for them, so it seemingly goes unnoticed. But you're losing some of your big taxpayers exactly due to that disincentive that you describe, and then you also lose public sector efficiency for your doctors due to exactly what you've described, that they've done the right thing, they're doing a vocational job.
They go off to Australia, they go off somewhere else where they feel like they're more valued. And that's such a big problem because these are the productive people that you're speaking about. And talk about a lack of sympathy. I made what I thought was a pretty reasoned point on a guest appearance I did for a podcast in London last month, the Ambitious Minds podcast, where I spoke about the first time I hit 100k PAYE. I couldn't believe that I was paying effectively 62%, or so I was seeing 38 pence in the pound. Now, I don't have any student debt because I lived at home for university. In Scotland, we have SAS. But if you're in that 100k bracket and you have your student loan, you start to get closer to 20p, 17p, 18p, which is just horrifying because what is the point in working at that point? And if we discourage people from pushing the boundaries of quote unquote success, and we don't encourage them to continue onwards, and we make them put it into their pension, which again, isn't always a bad thing that you're putting things away for a rainy day, but that doesn't stimulate the economy. Because if you have that available cash now, you will spend that in restaurants, in bars, in local businesses. And that is what we need. We need the washing machine of money to go round and round and round. Otherwise, we don't stimulate areas of the economy. And like you say, when that clip went out on Instagram and in particular TikTok, as you know, is a bit of a Wild West, the comment section was like, oh, boo-hoo, poor you. And that is the wrong attitude to have. I'm really sorry that you feel that way and you hate me for a particular financial figure that I've managed to earn. I haven't stepped on anyone or shat on anyone or beaten anyone up or done anyone out to get there. It's not a zero-sum game. For me to be successful does not impact your success. What we're talking about is incentivizing and encouraging those people that are capable of going onto those feats to do so more and not be worried about hitting that threshold and then having to play financial jiggery-pokery to keep more of their money.
Correct. And people, I'm a little bit older than you, I'm 46, and I have people my age who are at that earning threshold. They've got children, so they then think, right, I'm just going to work 4 days a week. Now, you do that with top surgeons, then again, the NHS is not working efficiently. So you do have that knock-on effect. We're not asking for sympathy, but we're asking for realization. Now, the point that I make is that for every person earning 120,000 who keeps doing that job, restructures and moves to Cyprus and the Isle of Man, and I know people like this, that's £60,000 to the exchequer we've got to make up because they pay £39,000 in income tax, £4,400 in national insurance contribution, and their employer pays £17,250 national insurance contribution. So people always say the rich are greedy, which I disagree with, because if you've made your own money, it's not greed trying to keep hold of your own money. I think the government is excessively greedy, expecting over £60,000 worth of tax for every payrolled employee earning £120,000.
These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything and all your problems. Before you jump on the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering the foundations and basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, movement are the real keys. When you do decide to supplement, however, what you choose really does matter. You know I'm a big fan of removing toxins and unnecessary things from your lifestyle, and I ensure that my supplements are free from additives, artificial flavors, and any unnecessary, dirty, toxic fillers. Personally, having seen many professional athletes and top performers utilize their products, I decided to give Pure Sport supplements a go. Their products are built on science-backed information, minimal ingredients, and they do exactly what they're meant to. Whether it's their best-selling ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, their deep magnesium to support with quality sleep, or even their natural testosterone-boosting Tonka Ali, I trust that what they make is developed to care for me and my body. Explore the full range of Pure Sport supplements at the link in the show notes, puresport.co, and use the code CAMBRO10 for 10% off. I think you and I might agree with this phrase, where I believe the UK has a spending problem, not a taxation problem. It's got a taxation problem in terms of how it's punishing, but in terms of the revenue collected, I don't think it has a problem. I think it has a problem in terms of where it allocates that spend.
Absolutely. So in terms of solving the government deficit, first thing on the agenda would be to cut the benefits system. First up, you should ban contradictory claims. There are over 200,000 people in the UK who claim both PIP and carer's allowance. So how on earth can you be saying with one hand, I'm not physically able to look after myself, so I need a benefit, but I'm physically able to look after myself and also care for someone else. So if you abolish those, and it's fair enough because it's a contradictory double claim, you'd save between 500 and 600 million immediately. Then you've got a lot of abuse of contracts. I unfortunately have HS2 going on near to me, which makes all of our blood boil. For example, so my background is in international trade, so I sold a lot of UK manufactured goods across Europe and into Africa. I was looking to sell some second-hand excavators to a big project in Africa, and I got into excavators that have been used on HS2. Looking at the telematics system, it said operating hours 3,000, it was 3,500, usage hours 700. That excavator had only been digging for 700 hours out of the 3,500 the ignition had been on. Because unfortunately, our silly government gave them cost-plus contracts. So they said, submit all your fuel expenses for doing that part of HS2 and we'll pay you your costs and some profit. So that a lot of contractors just jumped in on a lot of machines, turned the ignition on and just ran those machines unmanned all day. I announced this on a video, and within 24 hours, I had 3 other people saying, Andrew, you're right. My son works on HS2. He needed his articulated dump truck maintained, and he drove it in, and he sat in the cab with the engine running, so the hour meter scrolled up while he was having it maintained. Someone says, yeah, we saw six dumpers just sitting there with the ignition on. And someone else said, we know the people who rent that equipment, and they can see on the telematics system, the machines are just idling. So we're not getting to net zero by just running machines that are doing nothing, and the abuse of government contracts is horrific.
Totally agree, and we'll definitely get into that more. On your benefits point, initially when somebody hears cut benefits, if we think of the narrative of the George Osborne administration when he was Chancellor, they spoke about austerity, but during that time the state continued to grow. So when there's a narrative around benefits are being cut, it's making it harder for people at the bottom to live, how do we square the circle with some of the sort of potentially scrounging behaviour that we've got going on, which obviously sticks in the throat of the working man, but equally make sure that we have some sort of safety net there for those that actually genuinely need it?
Absolutely. So this is a hard balancing act. So you then need to do 2 policies at the same time. So, for example, one recommendation of mine, which is very popular, is all those people claiming benefits who are physically able to work must do some sort of community service, such as litter picking, mending roads, fruit picking, etc. However, you also need to make working more attractive. So on that front, I believe that where one of the bits we need to do with income tax is to introduce a 10% threshold, a 10% marginal tax rate from £12,570 to £25,000. It also makes our system more gradually progressive rather than the steep rises.
Because right now that's 20%. So as soon as somebody gets outside their personal allowance, they're hit with 20%. And there is a thing called the benefits trap, where somebody realizes if I get 30, 40 hours a week, even part-time, 20 hours a week somewhere, I lose all these different benefits and I actually end up worse off and I have to leave my house and do this work. That is completely contrary to the great British dream, for to borrow an American phrase, of what we should be encouraging people to do, which is to have accountability, to have a purpose in life, to have something to work towards. Even if their work is not absolutely groundbreaking, it's something for them to put themselves into. And I believe that men are either building or destroying. And I think if you're sat at home watching TikTok and YouTube videos and vaping and recreational drugs and porn, you're not going to put yourself in a good position. Instead, if you have something that you can have your focus on, you have a routine, a schedule that you work between 9 till 3 or 9 till 5 or whatever it is across the week, the mental health crisis would also benefit off the back of that too.
No, absolutely. So you've hit the nail right on the head, and there are statistics to back up what you said. Last year, 17,000 people between the age of 18 and 25 left the workforce, and they now earn more on PIP plus universal credit than they did working. So that's one reason why you've got to then say, well, if you're claiming those things, you then have to do some form of community work. But you also say, but if you stayed in that job, your disposable income would increase by £103 every month, basically, and create that incentive. So you're absolutely right to get that balance where you're compassionate, but also actually getting to give benefits to those who genuinely need them. You balance.
You strike that balance, yeah. And you could say it's the carrot and the stick, but for me, that's the carrot and the carrot, because you're working and you're feeling some sort of fulfillment and purpose. You're in a routine, you're structured, you're gaining some sort of fulfillment from that work, and you're keeping more money in your pocket, and you're not sat at home wasting away despairing, because we saw during the lockdown period, which you can probably guess I was pretty strongly against the lockdown policies, and we saw the effect that had on people's mental health. I shared a stat with Sasha Janssen when I interviewed him on the podcast in April that something like 550,000 people between 17 and 24 are NEET, not in education or in training or in employment. That is a staggering amount of people that are in our new young generation coming through that are being raised on a culture of dependency on the state from the very, very start. And that makes for a very problematic picture down the line in terms of the tax burden, in terms of the mental health burden, in terms of the actual physical health burden, and potentially not civil unrest, but civil disobedience or civil issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually very, very sympathetic towards people with mental health issues. I am captain of a Sunday village cricket team, and we basically make it into a village picnic. We had 3 guys, aged 25, who were all in the last year of university during the lockdown, all had mental health issues, but they all carried on working. And what they found great was actually having a group of people where they have great social interaction. There's 3 generations of people down there. I mean, my parents are in their 80s. My dad arrives at tea time with an industrial sholly of cold beers for both teams, right? Absolutely everyone integrating, personal interaction. And all of these guys have found it's fantastic, but they never stopped working. But what they had was then a social life and a community, which is another reason why I recommend that we cut VAT for hospitality down to 10%, because also with the cost of living crisis, people can't go to the pub just for a bit of a natter. So we're destroying community clubs, we're destroying where people had communities, and then so you're exacerbating the problem.
Yeah, so we're exacerbating the fact that they stay at home and drink alone, whereas they could, albeit alcohol potentially harmful, but they could have a few beers with their mates in the pub and have that social interaction. When you mention things like VAT cuts for hospitality, I hope many of the listeners are nodding along in agreement, but equally, it's the second and third order consequences of that which are positive, whereas I feel like a lot of the policy changes we've had under Labour in particular, the NI increase on employers, the potential messing around with the VAT threshold that's probably going to come down the line as well, the second and third order consequences of them are so devastating, whereas the second and third order consequences of a VAT cut for hospitality is more people socialising, more people spending money in the economy, more people seeing their friends and having that connection, that support. So we can make changes with positive intent beyond just the change itself, whereas at the moment I see us making changes not with almost any regard for the negative consequences which are going to be linked to those as well.
You are 100% spot on. And one example I have on this, which riles me a lot, is the VAT raid on private schools. It's not because I'm posh and well-spoken and went to private school, but the reason why I'm totally against that is it failed on the first result, but then the knock-on effects are big when you could have done something else which wasn't preaching the politics of envy. So you had the VAT rate on private schools, and the top private schools in the UK reported that the prepayment of fees went up from 121 million to 515 million. So the super rich avoided paying that VAT, right? I heard of someone who's got 3 children who paid 13 years of private school fees up front, right? So the super rich avoided it. It wasn't a wealth tax, as Jonathan Reynolds suggested. What then happened is, of course, the middle class got burdened with it. So some of the middle class kept their children in private school. They paid that, but you would have got 20% of that VAT anyway from their other discretionary expenditure. They would have used that money to buy furniture, cars.
But it was just allocated elsewhere.
But it was allocated elsewhere. Then other people took their children out of school, and that puts then pressure on council tax, because then the council has to taxi them around. What I have said for years, and I've got many people agree with me, is the following. What we should have done is go down the non-envious route and said, look, you private schools, in order to maintain your charitable status, you need to do more for the community. During your holidays, you've got fantastic facilities. We need those kept up. We need military veterans coming in, coaching children from underprivileged backgrounds, autistic children. All of the autistic children who I've coached are incredibly good at sport when you get them focused and channeled. And then, so you then bring this privilege to more people, whereas the left are saying, oh, we're just being righteous and calling out privilege, so it's right to take as many people down as possible, and then it's another failed tax on the wealthy. But then exactly where you're spot on is, you have that. So your secondary consequences of that are lower suicide rates amongst military veterans, and in 10 to 15 years' time, because good habits have been brought in early, a lower adult obesity rate and less pressure on the NHS. But all they can see is it's fair to tax the rich, we're going to be spiteful and ideological, and they've missed all those things. So that's one thing that very much annoys me about this envy. Let's just be purely focused on envy, that you miss those secondary and tertiary benefits of lower suicide amongst veterans and lower future adult obesity.
Common sense, but common sense isn't common practice, unfortunately. Talking about the schooling system, I have 2 close friends, one who I play a lot of golf with and one that's a friend of my brother's girlfriend, who are primary teachers just now, and they're speaking about the burden on state schools post a number of private school children coming out. But that doesn't just work its way to the top state schools. That works its way all the way down to schools in less economically successful areas, so more socially deprived areas. And the rise in children in those schools with autism, Asperger's, ADHD, all of which has had an increase in diagnosis. And a lot of these children are not getting the support that they need. I won't name the school, but a friend teaches at a school where one of the children is in primary 1 but is 7, so a few years behind, and completely non-verbal. Now, that is largely driven by the fact that we have not enough funding put towards schools to cater for those special needs and those special difficulties that somebody might encounter. And if we heap more children out of the private sector into the state sector, we actually increase the worse outcomes for people in that position that require more specialist attention, potentially a classroom assistant, some sort of one-to-one tutoring, whereas those children are going to fall further and further behind and never get up to speed and catch up with their peers, even by the time they're 18, 19, 21.
Correct. And I believe there have been 29 private schools that have closed since the introduction of VAT. And we should have taken the stance, in my opinion, that I believe Richard Tice suggested, where instead of making them go bust, we speak to the private schools and say, look, who of you have got spare capacity? Again, for you specifically, you need to take on more of these autistic children with superpowers, etc. Try and bring out their superpowers to make them really, really thrive, etc. So that's again my solution for that, and I'm very sad. We
could have used that resource rather than just shutting it off, and maybe there'll be cheers from the leftists who see the school close, but they don't understand the challenge that's going to cause down the line. And it is that politics of envy. It's that green-eyed monster that is like, oh, fuck them. And you're like, goodness me, like, that's not the way that we want to think about these things.
You're missing a golden opportunity. So absolutely. A huge part of my policies are about levelling up, basically. So we'll come on to it, I'm sure, but instead of talking about a wealth tax, I'm saying, well, if you actually care about inequality, shouldn't you be cutting income taxes and cutting regressive taxes, which are immediately going to help those lower down rather than chopping off the top? So again, on that, it's not me trying to be virtuous. It's, look, I was privileged. I went to rugby school. I didn't play as good rugby as Hugh Jones, who you had on here a few weeks ago. But absolutely, it's all about trying to bring opportunities to as many people as possible.
Yeah. On the benefits point, before we move on, one of the things that you outlined to me when we were speaking was around the issuing of vouchers instead of cash. That does remove some personal agency from the person in receipt, but it would massively reduce fraud. And it's one of those policies that on the face of it sounds like a nasty far right thing to do, because everything's far right nowadays, isn't it? I say not far right, just right. But that sort of policy, people will maybe grimace initially because they've been socialized and controlled to think that everyone should have total personal agency and control. But if you are sponsored by the state, you can understand why there would be some tighter parameters in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that is one of my policies, that as many as many benefits as possible should be paid in the form of vouchers or services. And the reason why, exactly, last year we had 5 Bulgarians who were found to have committed £50 million worth of universal credit fraud, and they'd also committed £800,000 worth of PIP fraud as well. Between 5 people, that's incredibly hefty. So that needs to be clamped down on. So exactly, you give things in the form of vouchers because, a can of baked beans, to resell a can of baked beans is trickier than when you receive money, which is a medium of exchange. Also, what you see is in the UK, 10% of adults are claiming some form of disability benefit, 10%, and they get money. In France and Germany, where they more provide services for disabilities, those claims are down at 5 and 6%. So there's a clear correlation that when you offer money instead of services, then the level of claims
perverse incentive goes. It's generally a perverse incentive. And then another matter when it comes to the benefit side of things is, of course, foreign nationals, and that has come more and more into light with the anger around the migrant hotels because it's so blatant in your face. But we've had a lot of legal immigration as well, which has brought in people either in low paid unskilled work or in no work whatsoever with their families and their dependents. And I think 20 years ago you would have got no backlash for saying if you haven't paid into the system at any point or paid any tax, then you shouldn't receive some form of benefit from the state. But fast forward to, I think peak woke was 2020, summer of George Floyd, etc. But we're still in the midst of this sort of suicidal empathy, virtue signaling policies where somebody can come here, have no intent whatsoever to work in our economy, and yet receive a house and a whole host of different benefits. One of the things that you can make a big cost saving on straight away is foreign nationals who haven't paid in the system not being eligible for claim benefits.
Correct. It's another one of my points that you can only claim benefits if you paid into the system. Any foreign national who hasn't paid into the systems on benefits, I put them immediately on a 30-day tourist visa. Now, if you said this in Dubai, people just say that's fine, because I've had a lot of friends who lived in Dubai. If you lost your job, you would effectively be on a short-term tourist visa. So it's not harsh. I'm not discriminating against skin color, religion, or anything like that. I'm just saying it would be economically stupid to import people who are not net contributors.
Yeah, and that would not have been a controversial thing to say a few years ago, but we've gone so far away from reality. And I've had a gentleman called Zubi on the podcast who's very big on X on this sort of topic, and he speaks about us becoming spiritually and morally unmoored. Now, that's partly, he feels, is a move away from religion, which I can understand. I think the UK being culturally Christian is generally a good thing. But when you become away from those traditional values and those traditional common sense traits, we end up with policies like this, where there's almost, like I said, that suicidal empathy, that virtue signaling nonsense, which just costs people and actually is hurting our culture and our safety as well.
Very much so. I mean, I speak to some people who came across from Poland 15 or 20 years ago, and they're in absolute shock with it. Ever since they've arrived, they've been working.
Poland's about to overtake the UK as well, genuinely, in terms of GDP.
Absolutely.
It's coming, and it's obvious why.
Yeah, absolutely. So Polish people who came here sort of 15, 20 years ago are looking to move back. However, as I said, when Rachel Reeves delivers her budget, music to my ears would be step one, cut benefits. So all those people physically able to work who are on benefits must do some form of work. And we know that a lot of them are physically able to work because the increase in PIP claimants from 2 million to 3.4 million in the last 5 years, 70% of that is for invisible illnesses. So they're physically able to work. You can't claim if you haven't paid into the system. As many benefits as possible should be given in the form of vouchers and services instead of cash. And I think then naturally you'd see a lot of the deficit go. And I think couple that with introducing a 10% income tax level for £12,570 to £25,000 and also reduce VAT for the hospitality sector to 10%, I think you'd see potentially up to 100,000 people re-employed in the hospitality sector as well. So then you have people going off benefits into work. You have a double win.
And the mental and physical benefits, which we've just spoken at length about as well. One of your second points is obviously from your manufacturing and your sales background in that world, and that's creating jobs. One of your ways to create jobs is, of course, around the income tax threshold between 12 and 25. What other metrics and levers might we pull?
Yeah, so I see huge potential in boosting exports for our manufacturing sector. I had some success when I was in Africa selling UK manufactured construction equipment to a contractor who'd only ever bought from Chinese contractors. So, first of all, you have a story, right? The UK, in markets where you think they're low-cost markets, UK machinery completely taking over from the Chinese. What you do is the following. They need 1 year's credit, but 5 years later, my client who's working on a huge infrastructure project, hundreds of millions in Kenya, said, that was the best procurement decision we ever made, buying from you, Andrew. The machines were 2 or 3 times as expensive, but they lasted 20 times longer. So maintenance costs went down. Fantastic. Now, these were generally from small and medium-sized manufacturing companies based in the UK who they'd never heard of. So you can sell them brands they've never heard of. And the plan, which could have huge benefits across Africa, is you say to UK Export Finance, who are the government agency who guarantee export loans from banks to help exporters. They unfortunately only provide loans based on past performance. So if you're an African buyer and you want to buy £1.5 million worth of equipment from small and medium-sized UK manufacturers, you have to have made £500,000 profit every year for the last 3 years. But that's not relevant. If you then win a really big project where you're guaranteed payment, then you might need 3 million, but they don't look at that. And so I have a lot of trade financiers who agree with me fully. What you need to do is say, look, we're going to lend you 3 million. The first 1.5 million you're not seeing, that's going straight into the bank accounts of small and medium-sized manufacturers to buy the initial machinery. We are going to lend to you in your local currency, and we can do that, for example, with the West African CFA. We can also do it in other countries outside of Africa, like Australia. If there is any problem in you paying back the loan, Mr. Contractor, all that has to happen is because you're working for your government, they need to just print more money. They then send that to you, and you pay back the loan. That is a hugely more lucrative deal than what the Chinese are offering you with their corporate imperialism, saying, if you don't pay back that loan for the road that you're building, we're going to seize that bauxite mine, we're going to seize that lithium mine, we're going to seize those port facilities, or we're going to own the road, make it a toll road, and collect all the revenue for the next 300 years. So we can offer them superior machinery to build their huge amounts of infrastructure. We boost exports for UK small and medium-sized manufacturers, and we guarantee ourselves from making payment by receiving the payments, because the get-out clause is so easy that the foreign government only has to print more money. And we could hold them to say, look, if you double cross us and you don't print this money, then we're not going to support you for future projects. Or, you want some clauses in it, and you give them a better deal. If I was International Trade Secretary, I could do millions of deals in East Africa, and I also speak French, so I could do it in West Africa as well. We unfortunately have an International Business Secretary who, I think he eventually got into university age 25 and then worked for a charity. He's never worked for a business. So what I'm saying is, if you had the politicians with the right business experience, you don't need to do long drawn-out trade deals lasting 7 years like we did with India. Exactly, very laughable. You can set the ground running. I know all the manufacturers in the UK. I know the contractors in Africa. You'd bring in these deals, and your small and medium-sized manufacturers are then getting big export orders in markets they've never even sent a sales rep to. They have to employ more people. So I see this as a huge wasted opportunity. What I also add in that, because I have the right experience, I would immediately tell that civil servant department what to do. You are missing a finance product because you're only basing everything on previous revenues as a guarantee, whereas we can ask them to print more money, and that is a guarantee. So that also brings in that I think too many cabinet ministers are dictated to by the civil service. I am promoting myself that I wish I worked in the cabinet, but that's the whole point. You bring in people with the right business experience. They're telling the civil service what to do. They're setting the KPIs for them and setting those expectations, which will benefit the British public and create jobs.
I think if we consider that, that's just one area where you have a level of expertise. We can definitely find other experts across many other sectors, whether that's hospitality, whether that's manufacturing like yourself. It could be anywhere. Why on earth is our political class so inept? And I think it's borderline by design. These people are just in there because of career politicians and they're willing to do what the blob says to the civil service, which I think is definitely not fit for purpose at this moment in time. And I don't think it'll be fit for purpose unless Reform do something very, very interesting when they get in as well to strip it out and haul it out. But that is just one sector, one man's ideas with your expertise and experience. The UK has people like yourself across many different sectors, and we must utilise them. And it's the responsibility. And again, we got introduced through the Andrew Craig podcast. Andrew Craig is very worried that Reform become a one-issue party on immigration, and that's a concern for me as well to some extent. They're the best of definitely a bad bunch just now, and maybe even they're closer towards being a good bunch to some extent. But if they do not tap into expertise across industry, like yourself with manufacturing and whoever it is for hospitality, whoever it is for other service-based businesses, tech, IT, whatever we want to do, then we are doing a disservice to the UK because we have these individuals here. We must utilise them.
Yeah, so the idea that I put to you, after I posted a video, a gentleman who's a trade financier, done a lot of business with export credit agencies like UK Export Finance across the world. He won Export Deal of the Year 4 years ago for a £450 million deal. He was phoning me up and screaming, Andrew, this is absolutely spot on. Every export meeting I go to, they say we're not helping small and medium-sized manufacturers too much. Our exports are too skewed towards defence. And so my idea is backed, and I concur with you wholeheartedly. You get another 10 people with those ideas, and the vision of prosperity that you could spell out for so many industries then completely changes the narrative. I mean, I've said, right, we're boosting manufacturing, we're beating China. I would then be the voice to say, guys, we've only been talking about offshoring manufacturing to India and China. I've laid out a foolproof plan where we can beat them. Imagine the positivity on the street, having that. So I agree with you. Bring in more people like that. I don't have all the answers, but I've got one example of something, which is what I'm trying to get to the British public is it should not be like this. And I'd like to, get together with the other 9 people from other industries and put that.
And have an approach across each one. Yeah, completely agree. And we've already mentioned the way to create jobs within hospitality with the VAT cut. Do you have any other levers that you have in mind for trying to generate more jobs across the UK?
I think I'm out on export and hospitality, but what I would say about that is our manufacturing, and that is also services industry as well. I've got to say, I think that would be a pretty good start. It
would be a very good start. And I think, as we've just pointed out there, if you have ideas across these two sectors, there's going to be somebody else out there that comes across a YouTube video at some point in the next 4 years, hopefully. There's going to be somebody else out there that comes across a clip on LinkedIn that says, if he's doing that in that space, I can do that in my space. We're going to grab the nettle, so to speak, if we or grab the thistle for being Scottish. We want to talk about net zero. Now, I was sharing with you that I did politics at the University of Glasgow between 2010 and 2014, and the climate alarmist narrative has been so deeply embedded for a very, very long time. In fact, I reflect in my primary school, we had this flag for being an eco school, but back then the narrative wasn't quite so, I'm going to call it totalitarian. It was more about recycling, which I think everyone can get on board with. We can all realise that we should probably reuse this can, or should reuse the plastics that we have our things delivered, and reuse our glass. Most people can get on board with that because it feels like a circular economy. What we have now is this fanaticism with carbon, which again, scientifically, they don't even have particular backing on. And I used to have these running battles with my lecturers and tutors around climate change being cyclical, because there's a lot of work by Bjorn Lomborg about the fact that carbon potentially is quite an important part of the atmosphere we should be very careful about, and he's done a lot to dispel some of the myths. But if you look at the narrative over time, we had global cooling in the 70s. We had acid rain. Remember, we had the ozone layer, which we were so worried about. But guess what? The world's pretty clever. It fucking healed itself. And now we've got global warming, which again, they don't necessarily have all the data to support as well. And even if we consider the UK's potential impact, supposed impact on that, it's so fractional. However, we have zealots like Ed Miliband in power who are doing everything they can to cripple the UK. The working man has a 25% levy on his energy bill, which he pays every single month for quote unquote green energy. Andrew, where do we even start with net zero?
Very, very good question. Well, the starting point is the whole business model to me is absolute lunacy because, so we're in Glasgow now, and just outside Glasgow, there's Whiteley Wind Farm. And that, I think, became operational in 2007, and they've got some lithium-ion batteries in there for some storage. So that wind farm was built near to a populated area with good connectivity. It might not look great, but it provides electricity to a populated area. Unfortunately, we've now got ludicrous abuse of the contracts for difference, whereby basically wind farms are being built in the wrong place on purpose, where the wind farm operator knows that we don't have the grid capacity to transport that electricity from where it's generated to where it's needed, and can therefore be paid to switch off while it's windy. And that is costing us to a tune of 1.2 billion every single year to switch off wind farms while it's windy to not produce electricity because they've been built in the wrong place. Now, that as a starting point is absurd. It then gets even more absurd. Let's take some examples just to back that up. The third highest recipient of constraint payments was Viking Wind Farm. Viking Wind Farm has the capacity to generate enough electricity for 500,000 homes. It was built on Shetland, which has 23,000 inhabitants. So a wind farm that gets a contract for difference from the government, which says you're only going to get a fixed price for everything that you can produce. Therefore, you're not allowed to charge a higher price when the demand is high. Therefore, the wind farm operators say, you then have to pay me for everything I can produce. Now, they've got a contract saying they have to be paid for everything that they can produce, but they've got a wind farm which has the capacity to produce enough electricity for 500,000 homes on an island of 23,000 people. It's going to be obvious that the 23,000 people do not need that electricity. Hence, that had all the constraint payments. Then where you get more lunacy is on the offshore wind farms. You had Seagreen and Moray East offshore wind farm. Seagreen offshore wind farm off the coast of Scotland became fully operational in October 2023. In its first year of operation, it earned roughly £104 million from the electricity that it generated, and it earned over £200 million to be switched off while it was windy. It was switched off 2/3 of the time. What is even more ludicrous with building these offshore wind farms that then get paid to switch off because we don't have the grid capacity to transport that electricity is they have to then pay rent for being stationed on the seabed to Crown Estates, the monarchy. So we have a business model whereby British households and businesses are being charged more on their electricity bills to subsidise building wind farms in the wrong place on purpose that then get paid to switch off, and part of that revenue goes to the monarchy. So it's very, very bizarre that you have left-wing people who are after a wealth tax, but they also support net zero, whereby your average households who are struggling are indirectly paying money to the monarchy.
My journey into self-employment recently and growing the podcast has been fueled by Newtonic, and so can your ventures too. A caffeine-based drink, but with so much more nootropics and other adaptogens in there to really fuel your focus and your performance. I've been drinking the drink since they got released back in 2023, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. If you want to fuel your focus and kick on in whatever your pursuit is, whether it's podcasting like me, whether it's sales coaching, whatever it is you're turning your hand to, this will fuel your gains. Hit the link in the show notes for newtonic.com and use the code Colin10 for 10% off your first order. Conspiratorially, I think net zero is a control measure to cripple the working man and to make him more subservient under the guise of it being noble and good and virtuous to be green and carbon neutral. And again, you've got the whole carbon credits thing, which you don't even need to want to start me on, which is a total mess. And then offshoring all of our requirement to whoever. I think we paid Norway £40 billion for their oil, where I don't know if anyone knows, but we've got the North Sea, which we could best use. And of course we could frack in the UK as well, which again is such a no-go politically because they're also scared of these climate change zealots.
I mean, I go differently on that. So, of course, Margaret Thatcher was criticised for privatisation in the 1980s. And yes, she did sell off Brit Oil during the 1980s, oil glut, because the oil price was pretty low for a long period of time. But she did reduce the national debt as a percentage of GDP from 40 to 20% in her time in power. So looking back, I would much rather hear that we're using those resources to get our public finances in order. One of the many things that I have a huge issue with Ed Miliband about, and I've got to say, he's just continuing what the Tories did, to be honest.
Sorry, I agree. Yeah.
Because Sea Green and Moray East, they came on board during the Tories' time. Ed Miliband, one big misconception or mistruth that he says frequently is creating these clean jobs. But I say at what expense? I'm working with the Cornwall fisheries, because what has happened is the Cornwall fisheries have been hit hard by Keir Starmer's EU reset deal, which went above and beyond impressing his mates at the World Economic Forum or etc. by giving them 12 years fishing access. So our Cornish fisheries are the only independent coastal state in the world where foreign vessels are allowed within 6 nautical miles of the coast. They have now been told by their local MP, we might ban you from fishing in certain parts of the Celtic Sea, all in all, to build another offshore wind farm. Now, I've helped them put together a video to take to their MP. If you look at fishing activity heat maps, there's a lot of fishing in that area, right? So why not do a cost-benefit analysis, even if you are going to think of building another offshore wind farm where there's little fishing? If you go by the Isle of Wight, there's very little fishing. So you could build one there where you don't have such a detrimental effect on our food industry, and then risk losing our food security. And also, I'm sure that the connectivity around a port of Southampton is much better than near Tintagel Castle, basically. So you're probably going to lower constraint. You're lowering the damage to an existing essential industry, and you're lowering the chance of constraint payments. But it doesn't even seem that they're doing this basic cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, it's because they're blinded by ideology. They're ideological zealots, and it's their way or the highway, and they believe they're on the moral high ground because of potentially questionable science and questionable reporting. And as you say, organisations like the WEF, they are railroading the average person towards being more and more reliant on the state. And that's by design. During C19, I questioned it. I wasn't sure if we were heading for this great reset thing that we're talking about, but that is undoubtedly the path where you become much more reliant on the state. You have a carbon credit score. We actually saw recently in the UK, they've just introduced carbon scores on food. And so it's about how much carbon your food emits for it to be produced. Whisper it, but if we introduce digital ID, you can bet that it will be linked to some sort of carbon score. So if you use too much carbon and maybe you have too much red meat that week, or you get something that's been imported from somewhere, perhaps you're getting strawberries during the winter, which have been imported from another part of the world, you will very quickly outscore your carbon allowance and put yourself in a bad position. The time to push back on that is now. If we don't push back on it now, freedom as you know it is gone. And I do not say that with hyperbole. We cannot allow these sorts of totalitarian measures and controls around this fantasy of net zero, which is suicidal, to continue at pace.
I totally agree. And what's absolutely ludicrous is, as well, fish is probably the lowest carbon source of protein that you can have, which is why this is absolutely ludicrous. Now, getting on your point about the World Economic Forum, I have said this, in that if you look at Keir Starmer's policies, all of them suggest that his top priority is pleasing the wishes of people who sit on the World Economic Forum, like the co-chair BlackRock. So BlackRock, obviously big American fund management company, they own 8% of Serco, who make very good money housing migrants. So what would they want if they want to snap up lots of things in the UK? They'd want a flow of asylum seekers come flooding in, that then obviously Serco would make money from. They would want a cost of living crisis, so you had as many people as possible unable to snap up these properties, which they could then snap up. You would want to force big landowners, such as farmers, into distress sale by putting, say, inheritance tax upon them. You'd also want to squeeze private landlords out of the market, and you can do that. Firstly, George Osborne started it by, in 2016, cancelling mortgage interest tax relief, putting higher stamp duty on buy-to-let properties. Rachel Reeves has increased that even further. And then Angela Rayner then put in the Renters' Rights Bill. So all of these policies open up the way beautifully for BlackRock, who are the co-chair of Davos, and Keir Starmer has said in an interview with Emily Maitlis, he prefers Davos to Westminster as well. All of those policies link up with the goal of helping BlackRock and impoverishing as many British as possible, which is why, again, talking to you, this is a call to action that we've got to be defiant of these things, challenge them as publicly as possible, because it's not a conspiracy theory. These are just facts of linking policy. Everything that I do is linked to a goal. Keir Starmer said he wanted more Brits to get on the housing ladder, but then they increased stamp duty. That policy does not match that.
Flies in the face.
Yeah, does not. That's just saying something to try and keep you quiet for a bit. So that is why, again, with the movement that I'm with now, Logical Politics, we've got thousands of supporters across the UK and internationally. We know what's going on. We're calling it out. And then what I'm doing is then putting forward solutions also, rather than just complaining.
Yeah, my friends and I that were called conspiracy theorists during C-19 around the mass, the lockdowns, the experimental vaccination, were all proven to be predictor machines, not conspiracy theorists. And the WEF policy of the whole Agenda 2030 and you own nothing, be happy is generally where we're heading, because they allow conglomerates like BlackRock to hoover up everything. And if you strip away our food supply with the farmers, you also become more reliant, and we do end up in that situation where you've got a carbon credit, a social credit score, using things to pay for. You mentioned Emily Maitland, or Maitland, whatever her name is. I don't think I can possibly speak about her without it being behind a paywall, because it would not be pretty. But when you see how these policies that the Labour government have enacted, again, some of them continuations of dreadful errors the Conservatives made, I believe that they're implementing a very similar agenda that's driven by Davos, but at a faster speed. And thankfully, there's more people now being brave enough to speak up and criticise it. Whereas before, I think because many people would maybe traditionally have voted for a former version of the Conservative Party, which no longer exists, you're almost thinking, okay, this is the game and I don't want to be part of it.
Correct. So I actually thought of starting up my own political movement during the COVID lockdowns. The first reason was, okay, they're locking us up. The most prevalent underlying health condition is type 2 diabetes. Why are we spending taxpayer money to ban playing socially distant sports like golf and tennis? Surely they're part of the solution rather than the problem. And you had those very brave chaps in that gym in Liverpool who refused to be shut down, to say, we have got 50 people on a mental health list who say they need to come to the gym, etc. And they stood firm, basically. And I think that they were fined, but the local residents found their money for their fine immediately. And I think people now have realised what is occurring. The call to action as well is, even if you think you're quite comfortable, they're coming after all of it. Because, I mean, I can lay out what I think the budget should be. And as you know, it talks about cutting benefits, stop immediately fining contractors on HS2, reducing income tax, reducing fuel duty, reducing VAT, right? And it all adds up, right? It all adds up. I know that is a possibility, but not if we keep allowing people to implement these policies that certainly do not have the needs of the British people at heart.
We've got to talk about the wealth tax, because individuals like Gary Stevenson online with Gary's Economics have made so much noise about it. It has gathered a movement behind it of people who feel disenfranchised and lost. I feel sorry for those people, but I don't forgive their ignorance for going along with policies like that. How do you critique something which, again, is so obviously wrong to so many of us, but we do need the right words and information to push back on these ideologues?
Yeah, so the first thing is, when people say Britain needs a wealth tax, firstly, we need to educate people and point out that Britain already has 4 wealth taxes called stamp duty, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and council tax. And stamp duty and capital gains tax are progressive taxes. So the wealthier you are, the higher percentage you pay in those. So let's take stamp duty. So stamp duty, if you buy a home for £500,000 to live in, you pay 3%. You pay £15,000 stamp duty. You pay £15,000, 3% wealth tax. If you have a home for, I don't know any millionaires who live in shabby homes. If you're a millionaire who buys a house worth £10 million, you pay 11% wealth tax and stamp duty. You pay over 1.1 million, right? So the rich pay a higher percentage of certain things. Just to put that in perspective, they pay 11.4% in stamp duty. That's the entire income tax from 19 people who earn £120,000 per year.
And they're high rate taxpayers.
Who are higher rate taxpayers. Also, you've got to solve, now I'm fine with having that, but you've also got to solve some issues with stamp duty, because what hardly ever gets mentioned is whenever you buy FTSE listed shares, you pay 0.5% stamp duty. So I've opened junior ISAs for my 7 and 9-year-old nieces because I'm worried about their future. One of them grew from about £700 to over £1,000. We then bought another nice share, FTSE 250 listed. Why was a 7-year-old child with a net worth of £1,000 paying 0.5% wealth tax? So I'm sorry, before we introduce a wealth tax, we need to solve some of the flaws of the current wealth taxes. And I say the same for capital gains tax. So Switzerland actually generates quite a lot of revenue from a wealth tax. So people say, oh, let's do the same per capita as Switzerland. But Switzerland doesn't have capital gains tax. Norway abolished inheritance tax in 2014. So all these places who make a little bit of money from inheritance, from wealth taxes, they have abolished another wealth tax, which is not what the UK is doing, right? Again, capital gains tax, before we look at anything, that needs to be index linked. What I mean by that is if you buy a property to rent out for £200,000 and then sell it 10 years later for £300,000, you are taxed on the gain, the nominal gain of £100,000. But over the 10-year period, inflation has wiped out quite a lot of that. So you're being charged tax on a nominal gain that inflation has wiped out. So there's a lot of ignorance because a lot of people say capital gains tax is only a gain on the is only a tax on the gain. It's not a wealth tax. I say no. It's actually taxing the original amount because you'd need £260,000 to break even. So there's that issue. I mean, I'll let you come in, but I do have another list of faults with the line of argument.
Yeah, I'm completely ready for them and I'm looking forward to them. When people shout about a wealth tax, I would say 90% of them wouldn't know that capital gains, inheritance tax, stamp duty, and even council tax are wealth taxes. I would be very surprised if they do whatsoever. One of the glib phrases that we get hit with, and you'll have seen my comment section, I've seen yours, and it's tax wealth, not work. They're obsessed by the tax wealth part, but they never talk about the tax work part. Now, you've already laid out around the lower tax rate of 10% between 12,000 up to 25,000. That is an immediate focus on not taxing work as much. You're coming with that solution. I haven't heard a single leftist tax wealth zealot discuss the not taxing work part. Instead, they are fetishized on let's kick people who we feel are above us and bring them down a peg or two. Why on earth is there no discussion around this second part of their stupid phrase, and why are they not interested in that part? Because the reality is they're not interested in improving things for working people, not in the way that they really say they are. Instead, they're doing it from a hateful, spiteful, bitter, and small place.
Correct. And that's my huge criticism as well. The slogan that they're using, tax wealth, not work, is not relevant to what they're preaching. They're saying tax wealth even more by implementing a fifth wealth tax and keep taxing work, creating such disincentives that they're doing. What I say is, look, we need to move to a much more progressive system. So I've laid out that I'd keep the personal allowance from £0 to £12,570. Then instead of being taxed at 20%, you'd then get taxed at 10% from £12,570 to £25,000. You then get taxed at the marginal rate of 20%, the basic rate from £25,000 up to £50,000. At £50,000, we then need to tax people at 30% up to £75,000 instead of 40%, and then 40% for £75,000 and above. Now, what I also say is, if you say tax wealth, not work, then you should be addressing the disincentives caused by the current income tax system. You then also very much need to then let people who are earning above £100,000 keep their personal allowance, because this is a silent killer as far as I call it. People dispute how many millionaires and non-doms have left Britain since Rachel Reeves's last budget. What I know, due to the people who contact me, is there are people who are earning over £100,000 who've still got £250,000 left to pay on their mortgage for their house worth £500,000, who have restructured and moved abroad, and they're now paying zero tax in the UK. These people are part of the 10% who make up 60% of the income tax revenue that we receive. So if you're saying tax wealth not work, you need to address these things. And although it's deemed as higher earners, that is essential, because I don't know how many statistics, but we are losing these people who are very, very important.
I described that as we're losing our future millionaires. And that's something that can't be undersold. So I've had a friend move to New York in the last year. I've had several friends move to Dubai because it's the place to be, I suppose. Even people move to Australia, where albeit I think their tax is pretty unpalatable as well, but they appear to have a higher quality of life, better weather, etc., better work-life balance, okay? But yes, we might have lost, I think 13,000 millionaires was the figure last year, which was the second highest in the world. But when you compare it per capita with China, it's a far higher percentage that are leaving. But you are eroding the tax base of productive people we spoke about in that bracket of they've worked their way up in the job, they've made it to the 100k mark, and then they're leaving and they're fucking off because of the ability to do so. You cannot keep eroding the productive tax base and increasing the burden through, one, our native population claiming more benefits than ever before, doubling up on certain things, and then two, burdening it with foreign nationals who are coming in who haven't paid into the system but are going to be a net burden and dependent on the state for forever.
Absolutely. So we've got absolute insanity. So again, if you listen to the patriotic millionaires, their first line of one interview was, in order to pay for public services, we need more tax revenue. No, we don't. So these people are also advocate. I can sit here and give policies why the current governments and previous governments are not serving the wishes of the British people. They're serving the wishes of BlackRock first. I can give details of why money is being squandered and wasted, yet still the people screaming for a wealth tax are basically advocating that governments can waste money and not be held accountable to be seen as, look, to me, one of my core values is the British public are the government's paying customer and should see value for all the money that they're putting into that system.
Yeah, and that at the very start we spoke about my friend who over 50k for the first time, been through the grad scheme, works for the big bank. He doesn't feel like he's getting value for money. In fact, he feels like he's being kicked and occasionally pissed and shat on when he's down on the floor. It's just not acceptable. And that is why there's a feeling of anger. It's why you're seeing people protesting outside migrant hotels. It's why that Unite the Kingdom rally in London had hundreds of thousands of people there, because they're angry and they're looking for solutions. I'm glad that today we're talking about more of the solutions and maybe just the anger side of things. But I can see why people resort to marches and protests if they don't feel heard.
Yeah, look, I can understand it, but the solution is the following. So I heard So the solution is the following. You need to actually talk to millionaires and accept two facts about most of them. They're used to getting much higher rates of return than other people. That's why they're millionaires, because they invest in things that they get very high rates of return on. And the majority of them will not be dictated to how to spend their money. However, quite a lot of them actually want to do some good. I know millionaires who mentor people and all sorts of things. So you sit down with them and say, look, I want you to invest in affordable housing in the UK. I want you to sell your foreign assets, for example, your US tech stocks, etc., and invest in affordable housing. Now, guaranteed, I can only give you a 5% return on that affordable housing. However, I'm going to give you an inducement and offer you 5% capital gains tax to sell those assets. So in effect, you're getting people to say liquidate $100 million worth of Amazon shares and then putting it into affordable housing. Now, some people say, oh, but you then only get 5% tax. Yeah, but if part of what you're saying is they have to put 70 million of that into affordable housing, you're replacing 70 million. You're getting 70 million for the same purpose that you would have for something that you would have had to taxation for. And it's a huge win-win. And so the middle class and the working class do not have to be burdened with funding affordable housing.
This is one of your ideas I've not got my teeth into yet, but that makes a lot of sense because we do have a housing crisis. That's visible to see. So if you can incentivize millionaires to invest their money more into the UK with a capital gains tax break or a reduction, and the money that they're then using to fund other areas of the UK has a positive ripple effect, second, third order consequences we're talking about, then it's a win-win. I don't think there's very many people thinking outside the box in that way.
And what I must add, which the left always miss, is the opportunity cost. If it is then known that being a resident in the UK, you can sell foreign assets and only pay 5% capital gains tax, how many French people who bought LVMH shares 15, 20 years ago might think, oh la la, I'm going to move to the UK actually. So this is the behavioral effect which is missed. So we firstly have, although you get lower tax revenue, you get a lot more for projects that you'd need tax revenue for anyway. And now I can't give you the answer to that. However, what I can tell you is capital gains tax in France is 18%, right? Their economy is not doing too well, so there might be fears of tax rises. And so I'm sure that we could lure some foreign nationals and do a nice deal. And then again, then be positive about having stamp duty as a progressive wealth tax. Say, look, your entry criteria is you have to buy a home worth 5 million, for example. So on entry, they have to pay that stamp duty. They got their lovely posh English house, etc. And then you sit down as well. You haven't called them filthy people who've exploited people to do well in life. You sit down and you try and make them a compelling investment opportunity.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just this morning, I was speaking to my friend who's been on the podcast, Mackenzie Haldane. He became a millionaire at 22 drop shipping. So total niche example, but he went and excelled. He did amazing. He spent time between here and Dubai. He's back here for just now, but he spends a bit of time in Dubai when he can, but he's not kept his residency up over there. And we were speaking about cities, countries, nations have push and pull factors. At the moment, Dubai, because it realizes it's in a desert at the end of the day, and for about 6 months of the year, it's pretty unpleasant to be there in terms of the heat. Outside of that, glorious place, okay? It attracts you because it pays 0% tax or 4% corporation tax, whatever. But compared to the UK, that's nothing, right? In the UK, we are having push factors like the taxation, lowering safety, and then we've got our general factors like sometimes the attitude towards entrepreneurs and people that are doing well. The weather can be a bit of a challenge. So we've got these push factors that are pushing people away, and then you've got pull factors of Dubai, you've got pull factors of Portugal. One of my recent guests you maybe enjoyed the episode with is David Bell, who's in the financial space, and he spoke very well about his move to Portugal. These countries are doing things to incentivize people to come. The UK has done nothing like that for a very, very long time. So your policy there around reduced capital gains for selling foreign stocks is exactly that. It's an attempt to pull people in rather than continuing to push people away. Absolutely.
And Cyprus just posted a government surplus as well. And they have much, much lower taxes than the UK. And they don't have the natural resources of someone like Norway. So it is really, really showing that you incentivize that economic activity. And again, one of the teachings that I'm trying to do, and we've currently got Art Laffer of the Laffer Curve in the UK who's doing wonderful talks, is whenever you talk about cutting taxes, people immediately seem to say, oh, but how are you going to make up for the lost tax revenue? This is just factually totally and utterly incorrect, basically, because of the activity that you're stimulating and you can get elsewhere. So, I mean, I'm a big proponent to solve the cost of living crisis. You have to cut regressive taxes. So regressive taxes fall more heavily on people lower down. And fuel duty is a prime one. Petrol costs 70p a litre, but we pay £1.36 a litre because of 14 pence VAT and 52.95p fuel duty. That is absolutely outrageous that there's just a fixed tax of 52.95p on something that costs 70p. But that, I've spoken to so many people, that reduces the cost of going to work, for example. So therefore, though you'll then see some of that revenue in VAT because those people will have more discretionary expenditure. If that was passed on down the supply chain correctly, then that would have huge, brilliant advantages. You'd see food prices go down because food needs to be delivered by logistics. You could well see our manufacturing base then be more competitive in certain export markets.
One of the biggest challenges we have around business in the UK is the cost of doing business, and that a lot of it comes down to the price of energy. I think I heard in a podcast the other day somebody say that basically economy is how much energy it can get through, and I actually completely agree with that. And with the net zero fanaticism, with the taxation on fuel, it's just continuing to suppress and stop progress, because if you can't have cheap available energy, and we have available energy but we choose not to use it, as we've just discussed, Norway shipping in from Russia, wherever else we're getting it from, then you don't allow business to thrive.
Correct. So I'm not actually totally against wind farms being built, but I say that they should be crossed with a clear industrial strategy. Of course, we are in regret that we didn't copy the French in the 1970s with the Mesmer plan, where they did a wonderful thing. They built 52 nuclear reactors over the course of 15 years.
This must be the first time anyone's praised the French on my podcast.
Yeah. But I lived in France for a year, and I played rugby in France and I had a great time. And it was in 2003 as well. So wearing an English jersey was great fun.
Yes, post-World Cup win, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the French do two things well. Their attitude to the speed limit, which would also solve a lot of problems in the UK, because on the French motorways, on a sunny day, you can drive 80 miles an hour. So that would get policemen off trying to capture people on an empty motorway doing 78 miles an hour and actually catching shoplifters, burglars, and rapists, because we now have
a joke the other day my friend told me was, you can't get a policeman to come out for love nor money if you've been burgled, but if you said that the burglar misgendered you, then they'll be there in a heartbeat. And we have this perverse focus by our police force on, and we recently had the Graham Linehan case, didn't we? Non-hate crime. That's right. So non-crime hate. So it's not officially a crime, but it's some form of hate. We are like, what are we wasting our money and resources on, Andrew? It's absolutely infuriating.
It's absolutely ludicrous. I mean, I am well known in my local supermarket because I've tried to help the security guy catch shoplifters. So one thing about solving the cost of living crisis is you need to have less crime. I was again in PC World or Curry's buying a microphone, and again they said they'd had £4 million worth of theft. Literally guys coming in masks with cricket bats, smashing the cabinet and just taking stuff and reselling it. So that's another part of solving the cost of living crisis, having basic law and order.
It's the generation of society. So again, I spoke about this with Sasha Janssen about all the vape shops and barbers that are springing up on high streets that may or may not be potentially money laundering, because they're empty 90% of the day. So they're not exactly taking a lot of cash in, but they appear to be posting what they're posting in HMRC. If you allow that, if you allow mass skipping of the tube, as we see in London, if you allow littering, spitting in public. Now, these sound like small things, but they are the pebble at the top of the avalanche towards denigration of our society. And we're witnessing that in real time. Like, you've arrived in Glasgow today. Glasgow city centre has always had a reputation. It can be a little bit rough, but it has declined massively. Much more vagrant homelessness, much more vagrant drug use, much more vagrant potentially people from other cultures that are not willing to assimilate here and aren't particularly friendly to the native population, particularly younger females. That is not what we signed up for. What on earth is going on? And if our law and order do not try and tackle that and instead focus on people putting out a tweet about men and women's spaces like Graham Linehan did, what on earth are we focusing our resources on? Yeah,
it's absolutely ludicrous. So as I said, I had to go to the magistrates' court years ago for driving 79 miles an hour on a motorway at 10 a.m. on a summer's day. You're there with people who haven't paid their TV license. Meanwhile, burglaries, shoplifting, the amount of Range Rovers stolen in London a few years ago was absolutely astronomical. So we're normalising crimes that make people quite scared to go out and about and do their business. So I've been a big proponent of this to say, look, short term, we need to bring the army in. And that's one reason why I say we need to cut benefits. We're spending 3 times as much, I think about 51 billion, on benefits for people of working age as we do on the police force, which is about 17 billion, which is just ludicrous. So do we want to live in a society where if you have anxiety, you get paid for 25 grand a year, and you normalise shoplifting,
petty crime,
burglary, but car theft is not petty.
It's not petty, that's right.
So I've called in the short term, I think we need to get the military deployed on in retail parks, basically just to bring basic law and order. You can stop and search people in retail parks because it's gone so out of order. Well, I think I do know the answer. The answer is Sadiq Khan. But I couldn't work out that after 50 Range Rovers have been stolen in London in a year, why they didn't line Range Rovers up in streets and have armed police taking over and catching these gangs. It was literally thousands. It was something about 3 years ago. The cheapest you could get insured on was something about £8,000 basically, because they knew it was going to get stolen. So the answer that we're coming out with is, oh, your insurance is going up. Whereas it should be, no, we're going to catch all these criminals and basically stamp out crime. So this is another concern. And if you cut benefits, but don't stamp down on crime, then you might have people then going off benefits and just resorting to crime, because we've got this great advert going, come to Britain, join our biggest, fastest growing industry, shoplifting, earn up to £1,000 a day reselling stuff. And that is absolutely frightening. And again, it's why my initial channel is called the Core Values Movement, because I think we need to get back to some core values where criminals are punished, they're not protected or rewarded.
Yeah, I think the phrase you use there is really important, back to core values. I would consider myself conservative throughout my upbringing, but I'm now a reversist. I would like to go back the way. And progressivism is sometimes deemed as positive, but if you have a progressive illness, which we do, a progressive illness will fucking kill you.
Yeah.
And the progressive woke mind virus is killing the UK.
Yeah, look, I still believe that there are lots of people with our values in that productive people should be rewarded and not have to fund unproductive people. Exactly what I mentioned about crime. And at the heart of it, the taxpayer should be treated as the government's paying customer and get value for money. So I do believe there are still a lot of good people out there. I believe at the next general election, which is why I'm going to be standing, people are crying out for a centrist party with a strong fiscal policy. Because of Tony Blair's poisonous legacy, we now no longer have, the government doesn't control monetary policy. Because Tony Blair's poisonous legacy, it's hard to, the judiciary, it's hard to actually make new laws. But the one thing we can do is control fiscal policy, and that can actually shape part of our societal values as well. If you don't reward being on benefits and you reward working, then it's pretty obvious what your moral choices are going to be.
Second and third order consequences. Exactly that. If you're new to the podcast, make sure you've hit the subscribe or the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on, so I can keep getting fantastic guests just like this one. I think, as you say, we need a sensible option at the ballot box. We need the political will of the civil service to be changed to enable us to get it through. We need the judiciary to not be so captured. I've spoken about this in the podcast a few times, but people were maybe not familiar with this idea that Gramsci, a socialist writer, had the long march through the institutions, and he spoke about how the communists and the leftists were going to infiltrate the institutions. If you blink and you open your eyes, you may well find that they have indeed done that since the 60s and 70s. We have seen a lot of the judiciary, a lot of the civil service, a lot of the higher-ups within the police force, a lot of the higher-ups within the academic sector. I mean, the universities are so captured, it's not even funny. That has occurred, but we need to purge our institutions of that, and we need a sensible political option at the ballot box, which is going to take our country back and move it in the right direction.
I totally agree with you. So again, I said that I started becoming very annoyed with politics during the pandemic, that I thought Britain is just admitting being an openly corrupt country. I've now recently woken up that what Tony Blair did in his time, putting all his cronies into the House of Lords between 2005 and 2007. Again, obviously, Gordon Brown in May 1997 put monetary policy in the hands of the Bank of England. Got all these quangos. Now, having also had some personal experience with the civil service when it comes to international trade, I've seen them double the amount of employees that they have, and just double the amount of bureaucracy, not double the amount of export orders that they're pushing through. So we need real constitutional change. I think the starting point, because government can still change and influence fiscal policy, is to come up with a strong fiscal policy. And I hope I've outlined quite a lot of those today.
Yeah, we certainly have. And on a personal level, you're going to be standing, which is fantastic. For a listener listening to this who is nodding along and agrees with a lot of your points and feels compelled to try and do something, what would you encourage them to do?
What I'd encourage them to do is to link up. The online presence is very, very strong these days. Link up with like-minded people. Then there are a lot of groups forming. I'm part of Logical Politics. And then really get a strong, united voice now. We've got to put egos and personalities out of the side, put those out of the way, and really, really combine stuff, because there are a lot of great critical thinkers. I'm in this movement, Logical Politics, with another 3 founding members, very well read, incredibly well read. So really get that motion. And I think, quite frankly, to start speaking up when they don't like things. We have gone along with far too many things. And so this Fabian society type creep of gradually creeping these insane things into our institutions has occurred. If you look at a lot of things that are actually commonplace now, they are only wanted by 10% of people. So it's now time to also realize that you are guilty in keeping silent. So I encourage people to speak up, find more like-minded people, and also follow your podcasts, which are very intriguing with people, and also to watch my channel, the Core Values channel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I shared a long post after the murder of Charlie Kirk about it should be a last straw for people when it comes to fearing about speaking out, because while they've murdered a man for speaking out, what he was speaking about was things that many of us feel and agree with and are concerned about. Whether you agree with absolutely everything Charlie said or not is by the by. And the number of people that messaged me about how I articulated how they felt in the post was really, really high. But many of them also did so privately rather than commenting publicly on LinkedIn or Instagram for fear of what their employer would say. And I would encourage you to understand that if you do keep entirely quiet and you kowtow to the woke agendas that maybe sit within your company with ESG, net zero, Pride Month, all these things that we know are not the agenda that we want to go down the route of, then push back as much as you can publicly, while of course protecting your own personal interests. And if more and more of us do that, and voices and ideas and thoughts come from a podcast like this one and your growing YouTube channel, then we will end up in a better position and we can save the UK.
Absolutely. And what really concerns me is the amount of people I speak to who say, I totally agree with you, but I can't speak out due to fear of losing my job. Now, I was first really alerted to this during the pandemic. I've got a lot of really good friends who run their own small businesses. Some of society call them lucky, but they've worked damn hard for years to build up those businesses. They felt that they could not speak out against lockdown, which was punishing due to the fear of reprisals. And this is very concerning. I actually welcome... I'd love to have a debate with Gary Stevenson at WealthTech. I'm happy to chat with anyone who disagrees with me. If you look on some of my posts online, I've got people from the far left who I argue with continuously about economics, and I've got people of the genuine far right who I argue with because I don't believe that they're able to differentiate between good and bad immigration. So.
They've completely lost the plot when it comes to that. They're like almost ethno-nationalists.
Correct. So for example, I commented on something where people were saying, no benefits to any foreign nationals. And I said, well, hang on. I disagree with that. If they've paid into the system, then I'm absolutely happy for them to have benefits. I have people friends from South Africa who paid 5 years national insurance contributions before being allowed to come to the UK. They both work. They don't live in social housing. You've got to realise a lot of foreign nationals work in the hospitality sector. If they've worked in hospitality for 10 years and were then made redundant, like a lot of people were after Rachel Reeves' budget, I don't mind.
They should be punished. Of course,
they should not be punished for 3 months. So, my discrimination is very clear. If you're a blatant non-contributor, then I'm going to try and make you come out with policies that enforce you to contribute, or if I can, get you out of here, right? So that does not incur skin color, religion, or anything. It's just trying to talk economic sense.
Yeah, and I think we've certainly done that today, Andrew. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have as well. If listeners want to continue the conversation with you, where should they head towards?
So I'm available on the Core Values channel with Andrew Wade on YouTube, and I'm also very prevalent on TikTok as well. Core Values, Andrew Wade.
Both of those will be linked in the show notes. Thank you to you, Andrew, and thank you to the listener. I'll be back to speak to you again very, very soon.